This is the Conscious Radio Network.
Oh, good morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you might be on the spaceship we call Earth. Welcome to Conscious Radio Network's True Ghost Stories. We are getting closer to Halloween, if we haven't already, when these broadcast. So, welcome. We'd like to welcome this evening Jason Hawkins. He is a director and filmmaker, and he has got some stories to share, some spooky stories, and about an apartment that he moved into while he was real young, and we want to get into that. How did this all start? And welcome to the show. I do have a clapper thing, but that's not too spooky.
There you go. Right.
So how bring us back in time, and you moving into this apartment, when, where, and how it happened.
Sure. So a little bit of backstory. I grew up in a very, very, very poor family. I mean, we struggled with homelessness, not finding a place to stay. It was myself and my brothers, and so there were 3 kids in the house, an older brother and a younger brother. And so finding a place in Los Angeles that my parents could afford that was, suitable for a family our size was not an easy task.
Yeah.
And so that actually winds up playing a part in what happened and is relevant to the story. So we moved to Los Angeles when I was a baby, and there were periodic times in which we either lived in motels or just kind of struggled to get our footing while my dad was looking for work and trying to get things situated. And I remember that from being a child. And then about the time of kindergarten, they found this apartment in Anaheim. And so we moved in there, and it was 2 bedrooms. So I was crammed into a room, a little bigger than a walk-in closet with two other kids.
Wow.
My parents had the other room. So a small place, and almost immediately there was just something that felt weird about the place. It's kind of hard to describe. I jokingly call it my spidey sense, or we tell people you can tell when something's off. You may not be able to put a word to it or put a name to it right away, but you can usually tell when something isn't quite right. You get this feeling, this vibe that just tells you, something here is different.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first touch on that, my first feeling. And I know my parents were struggling. I recall early on my mom talking to the landlord, and they were already behind in rent and trying not to get evicted and just struggling to make ends meet and not wind up back in a motel or sleeping in the car or anything of that nature. So one of the hard aspects of that is we were advised to keep our mouths shut, stay out of trouble, don't cause problems, not even be seen or heard, kind of a thing.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it was just a tough situation. My dad drank heavily. My mom was fairly apathetic to some of the things that were going on, and so we move in, we get situated, get enrolled in school, all the normal sort of things you do.
Yeah.
And so we're in the back bedroom, and there are 2 closets in the bedroom. Well, one large closet, but 2 doors. And I've struggled off and on with insomnia throughout my life. Even as a child, sometimes I'd have just a hard time getting to sleep at night. And I think one of the first things we noticed was the closet doors being open when we woke up. And it was a small thing, easy to blame, one of your brothers.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, yeah, mom would come in and be like, hey, clean your room, keep your closet doors closed, blah, blah, blah. And I remember on multiple nights pushing toys into the closet as kids are wont to do.
Yeah.
Clean up means shovel it into the closet and close the doors,
Yeah,
right?
stuck it under the bed or
Yeah, I mean, and
yeah.
some of those habits follow us into adulthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so we would keep things in the closet and keep the closet doors closed. And on more than one night, we would find them open, and open a little bit, the door ajar, and this progressed, and the uneasy feelings I had didn't go away. And a lot of that was attributed to when I tried to bring it to my parents. Oh, it's because we're moving into a new place. It's because things are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of poo-pooed and you know set aside
Yeah.
by my parents. Well, we noticed more and more the closet doors were open, and they started being open all the time. So
Fun.
those I would clean up, close them, go out and have a sandwich or have lunch or whatever, come back and they'd be open.
Hmm.
Uh, and sometimes toys would be shoved out of them. And it was always put off on, well, your brother must have done it. Just clean it up and keep things clean in there. Well, this went on for a while. And then at one point, I started having nightmares and just a funny feeling like somebody was saying my name. I'd be in the bedroom playing or in the bathroom, and you'd hear somebody in the next room calling you.
Yeah.
Being a kid, of course, I would go look, expecting it to be one of my brothers or maybe my mom. You just hear this voice calling you, and there was never anybody there. I'd always go look, and there was never anybody there. And the feelings of being uncomfortable, of just feeling like you're not alone. I guess maybe that's the best way to describe it. Those
Mm-hmm.
feelings increased, and they increased until I began to feel like there was somebody in the room with me. I began to get that feeling where if you could just look quick enough, you'd catch them in the corner of the room.
Yeah.
But you never do, right? You turn your head, you look in the mirrors, you try to watch, but you never catch what's there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird feeling because your mind knows it's there and your body knows it's there. You get that feeling of being watched.
Yeah, we have
But
that inherent spidey sense that if you're home alone and you have that feeling that you're being watched, that somebody's watching you. I mean,
yeah,
that
yeah,
is an eerie
absolutely.
feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Like and whenever I describe that feeling to somebody, they almost invariably go, "Yep, I get it,"
Mm.
because I think that's something that humanity has from primordial times. What I like to call our lizard brain. Our lizard brain is trying to keep us alive, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It knows things we don't. It's when you're walking down the street and somebody's walking towards you and you get an uneasy feeling. That's your
Mhm.
lizard brain trying to keep you alive.
Yep.
I like to jump off things, high things, and sometimes I'll double clutch a little bit, and it's like that's my lizard brain trying to keep my dumb ass alive. It's like
Right?
you don't need to jump off this tower, Jason. You don't need to jump
Mm.
off into the water. Um, so I'm a big believer in your lizard brain knows. It knows even if you don't.
Mhm.
And I jokingly call it a spidey sense, but it's that innate feeling of you can tell when you're being watched.
Yeah.
You can tell when you're not alone in a room. It just feels different. Well, those feelings began to grow really intense to the point that I didn't like being in a room by myself because I didn't feel like I was by myself.
Mm.
If my brothers were there or if one of my friends came over to play, it would be a different situation. I didn't quite feel like I was alone with somebody. How do I describe that? I wanted somebody else there, so I didn't feel alone with whatever was there. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, or safety in numbers, maybe.
True.
But
Yep.
yeah, so this continued. This went on for a while, and it just those feelings of unease grew worse and worse and worse. Well, one night I'm laying in bed, and I could hear my brother snoring, hear my older brother snoring, and my baby brother is in his crib across the room, and I'm laying there, and I hear something, and I look up, and the handles of the closet are just rattling a little bit, as
Mm.
if there's a little wind or something.
Yeah.
rattling a little bit. And that was it at first. Just a little rattle, a little noise keeping me up at night, making sure I didn't get any sleep. I start to doze off and you hear something rattling. Well, now you're awake.
Yeah.
So that happened 2 or 3 nights, and we'd always find the closets open in the morning. It's like, no, it was closed. I closed it before I went to bed. I woke up to go to the bathroom at night or whatever. It was closed. But you'd hear that rattling at night. In the morning, the doors would be open. And I noticed about this time that my parents were acting a little bit strange. Now, this went on for almost 7 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, when, and it wasn't something that happened immediately. It's not as if we moved in and bad things started happening. There was a build to it, from feeling to hearing the voices calling you to the closet doors being open. And my insomnia grew worse at this point, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
And I tried talking to my older brother about it. We were fairly close when we were little. We don't talk now, but we were close when we were little. And I tried talking to him about it. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Just shut up and go to bed. Just shut up and go to bed. Roll over, ignore it. Well, if you don't know what I'm talking about, what am I ignoring? Why are you telling me to ignore it if you don't know what I'm talking about? And, I tried going to my dad at one point and talking to him about it. And that resulted in a beating, which was often his way of dealing with things. And as you can imagine, when that happens, you, especially as a child, I'm going to be emotional here, especially as a child, you lose a sense of safety.
Yeah. I can imagine that.
Yeah, you start feeling like you can't talk to people.
Yeah.
If every time I bring this up, I get punched in the face, well, pretty soon I stop bringing it up. And so it was pretty horrific. And his drinking was getting out of control. He would get up in the morning for work, a bottle of vodka and a bottle of OJ, and dump out half the OJ and fill it with vodka and go to work.
Whoa.
So the drinking was getting real heavily. And I began to feel like I was growing distant to my family, distant to my brothers, distant to my parents. And I was starting to feel like I was on my own. And that feeling has kind of, stayed with me my whole life. I haven't spoken to my family in probably 25 years.
That's including your brothers?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody will talk to me anymore. They've all, I halfway jokingly say I'm an orphan, but that's certainly how it feels.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm assuming did you get any feeling that they were experiencing the same thing, or they just, all of them just ignored it and just brushed it off?
I got mixed feelings, which made it hard for me to get my footing, because I got mixed feelings of, don't cause any problems, don't get us evicted, we don't have anywhere to go, just shut up. And so I got that a lot, but this was something I needed to talk about. I needed to, I was scared. I was a little kid and I was scared. And there was nobody I could go to. My older brother began to act a little odd, which, as I suppose as kids grow, happens. There's a 4 or 5 year gap between us. And so certainly the age gap starts to be different around that stage. It starts to become pretty pronounced.
Yeah.
He's going to do preteen and teenage stuff, and I'm still in elementary school. So some of it was probably natural. Some of it I don't think was natural. Some of our separation, I began to feel like he was home less and less and less, and maybe intentionally spending less time home. Began spending the night at his friend's house a lot, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, so this progressed, and this has just mounted over years now. This has gone on for 2 or 3 years of near nightly occurrences, and I'm not sleeping. I don't have anybody I can talk to. I don't have anybody I can go to. Every time I try to bring it up, I would either get beat or told to keep my mouth shut and not get us evicted, which is an incredible amount of pressure to put on a child when he's like 8.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's not fair.
No, it's not. Definitely not.
Well,
Shit.
yeah, I mean, it's really shitty and it's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
As an adult, I can look back at that and see the problems, but when you're a child trapped in these situations, it's all you know. You don't know anything else. Um, so one night I'm laying there and the doors are rattling and the noise is happening and my brother's gone, staying at a friend's house. And the doors swing open and I'm laying there in bed, just terrified. And I'm torn because I know if I get up, I'm going to catch a beating. And, it wasn't a case of a belt beating. You know, I was sent to the hospital more than once
Wow,
for getting beat. So,
man.
I can't get out of bed. I can't.
Yeah, you can't yell. You can't. Yeah, you can't defend yourself. You can't yell
Yeah.
for help.
So,
Yeah.
you're kind of trapped in that situation. And, sorry.
No problem, man. No problem.
We talk about the
I
impressions it
feel you. I
leaves,
feel it. No, and yeah,
you know, 40 some odd years ago, and it's still right there.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, so the closet doors jiggle, and it's that brassy kind of jiggle sound. And the doors swing open, and then I saw her for the first time.
Hmm.
And hanging in the closet from a rope around her neck was a young woman in a nightgown, a white nightgown. And her feet are just barely off the ground. Just barely. She must have, I don't know, stood on tiptoe and then just let herself go, let herself hang. So I see her hanging there in the closet, and she's got kind of mousy, blondish brown hair, and the rope is tight. You can see the skin bulging and turning purple around the rope.
Oh,
They look like fat rolls. It is bit in deep.
wow.
Um, and it looks like she's been there a while. It looks like she's been hanging in there for a while. And I can hear the creak, just a little bit of a creak, like there's movement.
Yeah.
And then she opened her eyes, and she was looking right at me. And I just remember the terror and not being able to go to anybody for help, not being able to call for help. And I'm paralyzed in this situation. What do I do? You're an 8-year-old kid, a 9-year-old kid. What do you do? You know?
Wow.
So that was kind of the first night. And I began to see her almost every night after that. And always the same. It was like watching a memory play out over and over and over again. And I'm not sleeping, and I'm just struggling to figure out, what do I do in this situation?
Yeah.
You're supposed to be able to, talk to your family or go to your parents or share with your brother. And I couldn't do any of those things.
Have
None of
you
those.
have you tried reaching out to other people?
I
Friends?
really haven't, and I'll get to that actually in a moment, because that was a topic at one point.
Yeah.
But so I began to see her night after night hanging in the closet and just looking at me, and her eyes would just be locked on me. And then one night, this is happening, and maybe it had gone on for, I don't know, 6 or 7 months of this happening. And then one night, the doors open, she's hanging in the closet, her eyes open, and the rope snaps, and she falls on the ground in the closet. And it's like a pile of dirty laundry. She just falls straight down. And the rope snaps, and she's laying there in a pile on the floor. and she's looking at me, and then she starts to crawl out of the closet towards me, just hand over hand, pulling herself on the carpet. And I don't remember if I screamed, if I blacked out. I don't remember what happened. But I woke up on the couch in the living room. I was in trouble, and I was on the couch, and I said, I don't want to sleep in that bedroom anymore. And that got me in trouble because, you can't sleep on the couch for whatever reason. I don't know, but
Yeah.
so I wound up back in that bedroom, and I saw her again, and it seemed like almost nightly she was getting closer. It would repeat. The doors would jiggle. They would swing open slowly. I would see her hanging there and hear the creak of the wood, and the skin all bunched up around the rope, like the way it was bitten into her flesh, and that the purple. Like I said, I can only think to describe it as like it looked like fat rolls on either side because the rope was so tight.
Yeah.
Locked in around her neck. And the rope would break, and she would fall on the floor, and she'd start crawling towards me across the room. And like I said, every night it felt like she was getting closer. She was advancing more and more and more. And I felt like it was just a matter of time before she started crawling up the edge of the bed.
Yeah.
And I'm really struggling to describe the fear, that feeling of approaching doom that you can't get away from. And it's not like, 5 seconds and she was across the room. It was more like 20 minutes of just slowly crawling and getting closer. While all I can do is lay there in bed and watch. And I know there are people in the next room, but I also know they're not coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I was, all of 7 years old, and I realized I was on my own. Nobody is coming to help you. You are on your own. And, that is carried with me through my adult life.
Yeah. I mean, that's the scariest. I mean, that's the scariest thing. I mean, other than the apparition, it's like that is the scariest thing, that you can't do anything about it.
Yeah. The feelings of helplessness are severe.
Yeah. Yeah.
The idea that there's nobody you can trust, that there's nobody you can go to, to realize that you're 7 years old and you're going to die. Up.
Yeah, it is.
To understand the concept of death at that age.
Yeah. That age. Man.
So this goes on, and it doesn't get better. And, my friends wouldn't come over anymore, wouldn't come over to the house anymore. My best friend wouldn't spend the night anymore.
Whoa.
And so I kind of became a pariah at school, the weird kid. And so I lost a lot of my childhood friends. They just, they were probably scared. In retrospect, I can look back and see that they were scared.
Yeah.
And so they just, I was ostracized and cut off from my friends too. So not only did I not have adults I could go to who were supposed to, keep you safe and take care of you, I didn't have that. I also didn't have any friends because people just didn't want to come around.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, every night she got closer. And it was just I don't know, the feeling of hopelessness was overwhelming. Well, like I said, 7 years of this on an almost nightly basis. Eventually, she got to the point that I could feel her tugging on the blankets at the end of the bed, trying to pull herself up, and getting closer and closer and closer. Well, eventually, my parents had to move. The family we just lost the apartment.
Yeah.
Couldn't pay rent, couldn't keep up on things. So my parents opted to move. Well, had to move. And the part to me that kind of haunts me the most, maybe more than anything else, is that we were moving out, and the landlord had this teenage son. He was 18, 19 years old, Art. And the landlord had this teenage son, Art, and Art was kind of helping us move stuff, out of the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he goes, "I'm really surprised you guys lasted that long."
What?
And yeah. And I remember at the time, I think maybe I was 12, 11 or 12. And I remember looking at him and looking at the look that passed from my parents' face to his and my older brother. And they all knew what was happening, all of them. They knew the whole story. They knew exactly what was happening, and nobody said anything.
Wow.
So, yeah. So they let me live like that for 7 years.
Man.
Yeah. But they knew. It turns out everybody knew but me. Because, you're a child, people don't tell you things.
Yeah.
So I finally cornered one of the neighbors, this older gal. Her name was Pearl, who didn't live too far away from us. And I kind of just asked her, and she's probably 80, just much older lady. I said, "Look, nobody will talk to me. I don't know what's going on." And so I got the story. The lady who had lived there before us had murdered both of her young sons in the bathtub,
Whoa.
had drowned them both, and then hung herself in the closet. And it wasn't until we were leaving that somebody told me. So,
Man. Now, when you said everybody knew the story, they literally knew the story
yes.
the entire time.
It was disclosed. It was disclosed to my parents before we moved in
What?
that there had been a murder there, a murder-suicide situation. And my parents were so desperate, they moved us in anyway.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The expletives will be pulled out, but I would have to say, what the?
Yeah. No, that's a fair assessment, man. And, like I said, I've been living with this my entire life.
Yeah.
Um,
God, man, I feel so
you know,
bad.
I always just took to calling her the woman in white because I didn't know, how else to describe her or whatnot. And, through the years, it's funny. People call me a horror movie guy because I do write horror and work in the film industry. And
I don't blame
I
you.
got
I
into,
would too if I went through that at a young age. It's like,
well, yeah,
yeah,
it's art, be it writing or photography or whatever you're doing. Art is a great way to explore trauma.
yeah,
And, I've had people say, "Oh, yeah, but you make horror movies, so it's all bull." It's like, man, did you stop to think that maybe I make horror movies because it isn't bull? Because I need an outlet. I need a way to explore things. Um, and ironically, a friend of mine who's known me, I don't know, 15 years or so now, he didn't know any of this. So I didn't tell anybody after that. I clammed up, done, because I didn't feel like I could trust anybody. And I couldn't stand, the thought of friends looking at me the way they did when we lived there.
mm-hmm.
And so when we moved, I clammed up. I didn't tell anybody anything. I just didn't mention it.
Yeah,
Yeah. It was a few years after we moved that I began to get a feeling like I wasn't alone again. And at that point, I remember specifically, I was having a birthday party and had, 3 or 4 friends over. Uh, your typical early teen sleepover with movies and popcorn,
Mhm.
pizza, and
Yeah, I remember those days.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And we lived in the valley where the fog is a serious issue. I mean, whiteout levels of fog, just
Oh,
incredible.
wow.
And we did what young boys will do. We snuck out. We're like, oh, let's go down to the pool and go swimming at 2 a.m. And so we snuck out and we went down to the pool, and the fog was real thick. And one of my friends goes, "Hey, somebody's watching us."
Hmm.
And what do you mean? He goes, "I saw somebody in the fog." I said, "Well, okay, it's 2 a.m. So we're trying to make sure we're not in trouble, security or whatnot, because we just jumped the fence to go swimming."
Yeah.
And he goes, "I don't know. It looks like some woman in a white dress." And
That's when
I
you
mean,
go,
I
no.
yeah, I mean, my heart dropped, you know, because it meant that somebody else was seeing her, that she
Mm.
had found me after all these years. And I saw her a few times after that, and I have had, my wife kind of jokingly says, "Okay, you're done doing stuff like potentially dangerous stuff."
Yeah.
Um, I've had a number of near death encounters, and in all of them, she was present. You sense her, or you feel her, or you see her close by, and almost immediately I realize I'm in mortal danger. Something is happening. One example is we were swimming in the river, something we did fairly often down in Southern California. I knew the river well. I knew it kind of inside and out. Now, swimming in any body of water like that there's hazards and whatnot, and
Yeah.
you grow up around it. You know where to swim, where not to, kind of thing. And we were swimming. 2 or 3 of us were swimming, and my friends got out. And as I'm swimming toward the shore, something is pulling me backwards. And I'm a pretty decent swimmer. I'm swimming, and I can feel myself going backwards, not forward, as I'm swimming.
Oh,
And my friends are like, "Come on, quit horsing around." And then I feel like something's pulling me down. And now I'm in panic mode. I'm struggling to stay above the surface.
yeah.
And I mean, I know what it is. That area was sandy. There's no rocks. There's no branches. There's nothing I could have got caught on. Um, but that sensation of being pulled under. And so they grab a branch and they hold a branch out. And I'm holding onto the branch, and they're pulling, and something is pulling me the opposite direction. And they're like, "No, seriously, we're going to leave you here if you keep horsing around." And I'm yelling at this point and trying to get out of the water. And they managed to pull me out, but it was just one of those, do I say something?
Yeah.
Do I risk being ostracized and cut off again? Or do you just kind of laugh along and pretend it didn't happen?
See, I'm putting two and two together, meaning that if it was her, look what she did. She drowned her 2 kids. She
Yeah.
was perhaps trying to drown you.
And that's the other thing I've always associated her with is water. The feeling of water. When I've seen her, it's heavy fog, it's a rainstorm, it's
Yeah.
at the river, and I've always just associated her with water. And that
Hmm.
was that was the other thing that Art pointed out. Um, that Art told us about is how much I look like her kids.
What?
Yeah, he's like, you've got the same brown hair, the same skinny kind of build, but I was skinny and I had buck teeth and whatnot. He's like, "Yeah, you look just like her kids." And so this had gone on over the years. And I just had, like I said, I had multiple near death encounters where bad things happened. And one of them, I remember I'm riding with my friend bicycles, and
Mm-hmm.
it's foggy. Again, when you live in the valley near the farms, the fog settles in. It's something else.
Yeah.
And we're out riding bicycles, and you know, we're in junior high probably, and we're horsing around, and he stops, and all of a sudden, this car comes from I don't know where. We didn't hear it, and this car hits me, and it hits the bicycle, and knocks the crap out of me. I mean, had my friend not yelled, had I not hit the brakes and he yelled, they would have T-boned me. But as it is, they got mostly front tire and threw me, and so I'm scraped up and I'm bruised all to hell and back. And we get back to his house, and his mom was always this. So this sounds a little bit odd because I consider myself to be a skeptic. Even with everything I've been through, I think most people want to believe, and that makes them susceptible to belief, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Whereas most people I know who have had actual encounters with the supernatural are generally terrified.
Mm.
And so I consider myself a skeptic. I think there are things out there in this world that we can't explain, that we don't understand, and I can accept that. But I am skeptical that most stories are true. I think that often there's a lot of embellishment as people want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's like Fox Mulder. I want to believe. So
Yeah. I want that
yeah,
poster too.
right. And
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, I saw her multiple times, and we get back to my friend's house, and his mom, who was a very, I don't want to use the term medium because I don't think that's accurate, but she was very open. There was always weird shit around her,
Mm,
always.
sensitive,
Yeah, and
empathic.
we come in, and I'm bleeding, I'm scraped up and bleeding, and I've got some road rash, and I'm okay, but I'm bleeding.
Yeah.
And we come in, and she's sitting at the wall. She's sitting, and a cigarette is just burned down to ash in her fingers, and she's staring at the wall and just totally motionless. We walk in, and my friend, mom, hey, mom, nothing, nothing. And she slowly turns her head to me, and she goes, "You're supposed to be dead."
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
First
What?
words out of her mouth, "You're
Holy
supposed to be
crap.
dead."
Oh
And
man.
yeah,
I tell you what, let's pause right there for a moment. I'm going to bring in a 1 minute commercial, and
yeah.
we'll get back to that thought in just a moment because I want to keep people on the edge on this. One of our sponsors, the House of Dolls Midnight Horror Show, coming to you. Go visit them. We'll be right back.
Greetings, doll lovers and horror fans. I am Master Dolly, the Doll Master, inviting you to my house of dolls, where the dolls come alive and the horror begins.
I think we're creepier than that. Oof. You were supposed to be dead.
You're supposed to be dead.
Wow.
That and that hit me like somebody dumping ice water on me.
Yeah. And
It
you were how old
was
at the time?
junior high, so what, 13 maybe?
Yeah.
About 13. I remember junior high, but yeah. I'm a little older now, so that's some years back. So she stands up and she starts walking forward. You're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be dead. And she's just saying it over and over and over and over. And my friend, is grabbing her arm and she's just walking towards me.
Was it like she was in a trance or something? Like,
yeah, her eyes were blank. Like there was nobody home.
wow.
There was nobody home. I don't even know if she saw me. And she's walking forward. You're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be dead. And I move, and she just walks into the wall. Bonk, you're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be dead. And just running her face into the wall over and over again, repeating that over and over. You're supposed to be dead. You're supposed to be dead. And my friend is grabbing her and pulling her because she's running her face, into the wall.
Yeah.
And he's yelling at me to help. And so we managed to kind of get on each arm and pull her back. And she just looks around and she's like, "Oh, you guys are home early." It was like all of a sudden she just snapped back from wherever she had been.
You know what I'm thinking? I think you know what I'm thinking. I think that the spirit of this woman stepped into her.
Yeah.
Took over her body momentarily.
That had definitely occurred to me because, like I said, she was just the kind of person that I would just describe her as open. I guess she's like an open channel, and she was always like that. Just a very open person. Energy flowed through her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it wasn't long after me and that friend stopped being friends. Just kind of, he never really said why, but we kind of just got distant. And it wasn't long after that I ran away. I didn't feel safe. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go, so I ran away. And I've been living on my own since.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I left home when I was 13 and just never went back. And sometimes I think the most fucked up part of that is nobody came looking for me.
Whoa. No, none of your siblings. No. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I left and nobody came looking.
Man.
So, but I managed to, get through school, managed to get into college, and kind of just build my life on my own.
Yeah.
I moved 1,000 some odd miles away, just kind of in the dead of night. Moved. I just left. And it has been mostly okay. I don't want to say it's been okay, but it's been mostly okay. But I have continued, like I said, it's been, what has it been, 40, almost 40 years exactly.
Wow.
And I still continue to feel her presence from time to time. I feel like if I look quickly, she's standing in the corner of the room. And she has my subconscious, I guess, a friend of mine that I mentioned a few minutes ago, who has known me for a long time. When I told him about this, when I told him the story, he told me, he said, that explains a lot. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, she's appeared in your films and in your stories. And I went, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you've seen her?
Yeah.
And I guess in some way, inadvertently, I have included actors who look like her or had images in my art, in my films that represent her.
Huh.
And
do they? or is it something that you subconsciously did and it just
It must have been
synchronistically did happen?
subconscious because I don't think I would have consciously done it.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that for 40 years I didn't tell anybody about. I just lived with it and I didn't tell anybody.
Hmm.
So I certainly would not have knowingly put her in the background of a film or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
But he said, yeah, he goes, suddenly a lot of things make sense about you. And I don't know how I feel about that statement. you know, uh,
Yeah.
I just don't know how I feel about that statement. But he's like, yeah, suddenly a lot of things make sense. And he kind of called me out good naturedly. And he called me out on some things. And he's like, this is why you do this. This is
Hmm.
why you do that. It's like, this is why you behave this way and do these things. He's like, now that there's a reason, it makes sense.
Hmm.
And ironically, and this is, really tragic, of all the kids I grew up with and all the friends I had back then, I'm the last. They're all dead. I'm the last
What?
one. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. When I reached 50 years old, I was last man standing.
man.
You know?
Now were their deaths? You know anything about their deaths? Were they all similar, or
A couple of them. Well, we grew up in not a great neighborhood. Let's kind of put it that way. And so violence was common. Drug overdose. My best friend, who I'd known since junior high, sixth grade, maybe the one kid that actually, we connected off and on throughout the years. My best friend killed himself just a couple of years ago,
wow?
and he said, "I just can't live with it." I don't know what he meant. So it's been like that. Um, I live far away now. Um, I haven't seen family in years. I don't even know how many years. They don't talk to me. Uh,
Uh, yeah.
yeah. So it's a tragic, kind of just a tragic, fucked up story. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Trauma of your youth, I guess, and the fact that people knew and didn't say anything or didn't take any action because they were worried about where we were going to wind up living. We were going to get evicted, and so they chose to kind of sacrifice me in place of peace, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Um. So I
yeah,
wanna
and
I
there's
wanna I wanna dig a little bit into briefly maybe try to maybe try to get some puzzle pieces together, and want
yeah.
to get your take on some of the things and see what your thoughts are. Maybe it's something you thought about. I don't know. How, the first question though is, did you find out much about this woman's? I mean, you obviously know how she died and what caused her to kill herself. How long ago did that happen before these events took place?
Well, it was the owner or the renter before we moved into the apartment, because Art was responsible for pulling up the carpets, and
Yeah.
cleaning the tub and stuff like that. So it
Okay.
was the person before us.
All right. So it
We
wasn't
moved
that
we
long. It
moved in.
wasn't 7 years. It was a lot less than
No, it
that.
was like a couple of weeks before we
Oh,
moved in.
wow. That. Oof. See
So
what my thought was, 'cause I've heard a lot of stories of this and a lot of cases that I've worked on this, is that my original thought as you're going through the story and stuff like that was that you may have been a reincarnation of one of her children, not only because one you looked like one of them, but if there was that time span that you could have been a reincarnate, and the reason that
yeah,
she's after you is because you're a reincarnation of one of her children. But obviously that kind of now messes with the storyline. But there might be another link somewhere. Why you? Have you asked yourself that, and maybe did any type of research? Reached out to a
I
psychic, reach out to a medium to try to dig into this
yeah, I have
soul aspect?
I have asked myself that question almost every day. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as people I think do when they're faced with situations like that. Why me?
Yeah.
You know, why me? Was it because of the situation that we were living in that I was vulnerable? You know, um, I didn't have a protector or any presence. You know, I was literally on my own.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that made me vulnerable to attack, if it made me open in some capacity.
That's a
You
that's a
know,
definite potential. Yeah.
yeah. And I have talked to, you know, I didn't tell my story until about, I don't know, 3 years ago. I think was the first time I told this to anybody.
And now.
And now,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was the first time I even shared it with my wife. You know,
Mm.
she had no idea. Um, People who have known me, you know, most of my life had no idea. My best friend's sister, who obviously I was close to, we've known each other since we were kids.
Yeah.
Um, she looked at me and she said, um, like all of a sudden I understand you. She goes in ways I never did before. She goes, there are so many things in your life and so many instances that didn't make sense. She goes, and now that I have context, she goes, you know, she told me that they used to kind of laugh about um, how often I almost died
Yeah.
and how often I found myself in life threatening situations. And she said, you know, we kind of laughed about it that you were a cat on like life number 11, you know, kind of a thing. And,
Yeah.
and so when I told her the truth, and this is just after my friend killed himself, you know, we just sat down and started talking. And she immediately goes, you know, brother, that's a demon. That's not a ghost.
Mm.
She goes, and she she is just convinced, and I don't know. Um, you know, like I said, I consider myself to be a skeptic even now, so I don't know. And that's one of the things I've had to get used to is I don't know, and I'm probably not going to know. You know, there are some answers you just never get.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she is 100% convinced that it's a demon that latched on to me, and it's just stayed with me my entire life.
Mm. Has there been any? What's the most recent um, encounter with either with this woman or something remote that you
Um,
think might be connected to her?
the most recent was sensing her and feeling her presence in the house. And I recall very specifically, I was getting ready to go up to bed, and we have a multi story house. And as I'm headed up toward the top floor, I get this overwhelming sense of dread. I mean, it's crippling. Like it's like somebody putting 100 pounds on your shoulders all of a sudden.
Wow.
And it's, you know, when that hits you, your knees get weak. You have a hard time getting your breath. I mean, it's legitimately crippling. That sensation, it's overwhelming. And you know, you hear about people the term scared to death.
Mm.
Like if it's that kind of feeling, your heart starts racing. It feels like you're just being crushed. You can't breathe. And as I looked up the darkened stairs, I saw her standing at the top of the stairs.
Whoa.
So, and then she turned and walked into our bedroom.
Mm.
and that was the last I saw her. That was about 8-9 months ago, maybe.
Whoa. In the place that you're currently living in now?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And I hadn't seen her or anything for probably 6 or 7 years before that.
Hmm.
So, you know,
If I were to give you some resources, I've got a lot of resources that can help you. In several different disciplines too. I mean, from religious to, I mean, all the way up to just short of the Vatican, literally. To some of the best mediums out there, to people who dig deeper than mediums or psychics, that you can consult with and see if we can, if you're willing to come to the bottom of this, or at least try to get something at, try to, because I'm curious. I mean, brother, I am so sorry, my friend. I mean,
thank you.
I feel your pain. I do. Um, and I want you to come to the bottom of this. I would like to see you live a beautiful life without this creature, demon, being, entity, whatever it is. It may appear as a woman, but we don't know. But I would
Yeah.
like to know, and I'm sure you would like to know.
I have
And
mixed feelings.
yeah,
Part of me is don't poke the bear.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's like, could it get worse? Maybe. And that's a real concern.
yeah,
It's at a point right now that I can live with it, but what if it gets worse?
yeah. The thing is, too, it's like you'd almost have to think, okay, it's like you'd have to gather an army together, because you can't go this alone. And you don't at this point, it's like one, you got to trying to find out what it is that you're dealing with. What is it? And then kind of go, okay, like the Goonies. They had a team of people going in and looking
Sure.
for the treasure. And everybody fought the war in their own way, but the same war. And that's what it seems like. That's what it feels like. This is a war. This is a spiritual war against you.
Yeah. It's
And
something. There's
yeah,
something there,
yeah,
and it's followed me across state lines.
Mhm.
So, and the general theory right now, again, put forward by, my friend's little sister who's family to me, is that it's not a ghost, it's a demon, it is attached, and it is following.
Mm.
you know and that's the general consensus at the moment. And I have thought about talking with people, I have thought about going for help, but history has taught me that that isn't received well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. How's your
So
faith?
I don't have any. None.
Well, um, I've got yeah. Well, let's discuss this um, off the recording. But I'll give you some names and some really 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 high up people, that
Yeah.
have got more than the best credibility. Um, and we can discuss that afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, man, I don't know what to say, man. It just, dude, I feel it. I mean, I've investigated some really really crazy cases, but this is bar none. it, it I
Yeah.
And for the fact that you spent your whole life, pretty much most of your life, I mean, from day one, having to deal with this, it's not fun. It's horrific, and it's sad.
Yeah.
And yeah, I empathize with you. I feel the pain. I understand the pain, and I mean, we both shed tears on this show tonight.
Almost 50
And-
years now. This has been
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we will. Normally on my shows, especially with my regular programming, I always go with the guests. It's like, so you have a takeaway? Any, words of wisdom, words of inspiration, and a takeaway for our guests? What would you want to say to our viewers and listeners before we close the show?
It's interesting. Like in my case, I have spent most of my life trying to be the person that I needed when I was a kid. I don't hesitate to step in if somebody needs help. Looking after my own son, obviously. And I would say listen to people, listen to what they're not saying. Because a lot of times it's what they're not saying that matters the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are things out there that we can't explain. And maybe someday science will catch up and we can explain some of these things. But there are things out there in the world that we can't explain, and some of them mean us harm.
Yeah. Absolutely. Living and dead, or just there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that is important too. It's what we don't say that can be damaging. Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yep. Well, that'll close the show. I appreciate you sharing your life with us on this show tonight. And
Thank you very much.
you are very welcome, very, very welcome, and humbled and honored for you to give up some time for this. But yeah, stand by after the closing, and we'll chat a little bit. So,
Sounds good. Thank you.
cool. You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for watching Conscious Radio Network's True Ghost Stories. And until then, we will see you sometime.